Archbishop Viganò is back. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. My name is Stephen Cox. That's the topic for today's show. We will get into some of His Excellency's latest statements in just a moment, but thanks for being with us. It's great to be here and to have you tuned in. We have a great show for you this evening, focusing on especially Archbishop Viganò. He's issued two recent statements, which you probably haven't heard about because the establishment, traditional media, does not wish to carry what His Excellency says anymore. He is obviously deemed excommunicated by the conciliar authorities, and thanks to Michael Matt at the Catholic Identity Conference several years ago, he's also been excommunicated from the traditional establishment movement as well. But we're here in the counter-revolutionary traditional Catholic movement, and we love Archbishop Viganò. We think what he says is fantastic, and today's show will show you that he is on target and on point with how he's going about seeing things, and how really what he says in his most recent statements here completely debunks the attitude and approach of those seeking to have their crumbs from the conciliar authorities, the collaborators, if you will, in the traditional movement, who just simply want to, again, go quiet in exchange for some nice Latin masses, not the actual, counter-revolutionary traditional Catholic faith pre-Vatican II, but to just go along for the ride to get some nice liturgies from the conciliar authority. So we'll get into that today. Again, thanks for being here. The first thing we need to know, again, here is Archbishop Viganò's statement. I put this up on Twitter a couple days ago. This was actually released September 3rd, so actually a couple weeks ago. And this was not widely covered, argumentum ex concessis, that His Excellency wrote, and you can see why. Because here's what His Excellency said: the Synodal Church includes conservatives in its coveted pantheon, not only because it gives them what they want, solemn pontifical liturgies celebrated by influential prelates without doctrinal implications, but also because none of the Holy See's interlocutors has the slightest intention of demanding more. So obviously you can tell why that would not be something that the authorities, the most prominent persons in the traditional movement, want to hear, right? But nonetheless, this is where we're at. And so Archbishop Viganò has issued two statements more recently. One is called Obedientibus. I'll bring that up on the screen here in just a second. And then secondly, here's His Excellency's website here. Secondly, non sequitur. And we'll go over these in just a second here. And, it's interesting, today, what are we hearing from some of the loudest persons in this space right now? That, again, we're being divisive, that we're causing problems. Again, it was Pat Buchanan who knew, just because the Bush family was in the establishment of the Republican Party for decades, right? Didn't mean they were right. And he knew that they were going soft, and that they weren't continuing the real fight that the Republican Party needed to, that it was selling out to the globalists and the establishment. And we're seeing the same thing going on in the traditional movement itself. And I think one analogy that really needs to continue to be hammered home here for us is that we are counter-revolutionaries. Okay, so what does that mean? Think back to the French Revolution. Think back to the Vendée. Think back to how they resisted conscription into the French Masonic army. Think of how they rejected those clergy who swore an oath to the National Assembly, to the new secular Masonic constitution. They rejected all that. And they said, no, we're going to resist this. We're going to fight. And they fought not to have a deal with Robespierre or the Masonic usurpers who overthrew the church. They didn't want to shake hands with those who overthrew the legitimate authority of the state, the church, that is, the kingship of Christ. They said, no, we're going to defy, we're going to resist, and we're going to fight for tradition. We're going to fight for the kingship of Christ. Again, they did not seek peace, a false coexistence, a shameful coexistence, a dishonorable coexistence with the Masonic forces. So you could say the same thing is that's our playbook. That's our template. That's where we are coming from. The Church of Vatican II, the Masonic rites the Novus Ordo Masonic Rite, the 1789 Revolution. Again, that's what Archbishop Lefebvre referred to the Second Vatican Council as the French Revolution inside the Church. Well, if we really are counter-revolutionaries, we cannot be shaking hands and striking deals with these usurpers, can we? No. Principles matter. Doctrine matters. Positions matter. Now, we understand there's many people, many priests especially, caught in the thick of all this, trying to do their best in diocesan situations, in Ecclesia Dei groups, etc. But if our analogy is true, if our analogy holds, I think you can say that those who swore an oath to the Masonic Republic, those clergy who signed their vows to the Masonic state, those are like the priests going along with the conciliar church, like with the modernists in Rome, right? They have sworn and they have pledged their duty, their fealty to the Masonic infiltration effort that was run at Vatican II. Same thing. So, there's a lot of clergy stuck in there. And, we hear the name of Cardinal Burke, Cardinal Sarah, and all this recently for presumably defending the faith. In reality, what they're defending, they just want to go back to Vatican II. They want to go to the beginning of the revolution and the documents, again, written by Yves Congar, Annibale Bugnini. Okay. And that's a problem. Because, again, when Cardinal Burke is out here telling Raymond Arroyo the extraordinary form of the Mass, the extraordinary form, the older form, I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it. This is not the extraordinary form. The Latin Mass is distinct from the Masonic Bugnini rite. Okay. And again, I have to say this. I know a lot of people who think this way. If Cardinal Burke was the Pope, if he was elected, would the crisis in the church be over? Now, let me ask you this. If Archbishop Viganò was elected Pope, would the crisis in the church be over? Yes, absolutely. You cannot say the same for the conciliar conservatives like Cardinal Burke and others who are just in the milieu of the conciliar authorities. The crisis would not be over. They would just want to go back to Vatican II. Whereas Archbishop Viganò, like Archbishop Lefebvre before him, and like all the other sedevacantist bishops even, you can say, if any of them were in the office of the papacy, this crisis would be over as we know it. You cannot say the same about the conciliar bishops and conservatives. You just can't. So, having said that, let's get into these statements. Again, this is really important to understand because, again, Viganò obliterates the entire idea that we need to be obedient to these conciliar authorities. Again, he's saying we can be obedient, but to the obedient, right? To those who actually have the true Catholic faith. Otherwise, it's a false disobedience. It's a false obedience at the sake of the faith. You're compromising the faith to persons who do not have it. Again, modernism is a heresy, right? Modernism is a heresy, just as Protestantism is a heresy. If tomorrow Leo said, I'm a Protestant now, I mean, there's no substantially no difference between that and what he's doing now as a modernist. And again, we don't need more time. We're not going half-cocked here. We have had, 5 months now to see and to watch him in action. And what do we get? We have, the full-on green agenda is being promoted every single day. Just the other day, actually, Arnold Schwarzenegger it's announced that he's going to be attending a climate justice conference led by Leo, which is coming up here very, very soon. It might actually happen here on the 1st, October 1st to the 3rd, Raising Hope for Climate Justice, led by Leo at Castel Gandolfo. Leo also signed off on approving a homosexual man in a homosexual relationship to be the head cook at the restaurant at Castel Gandolfo's Laudato Si complex. Right. And not only that, here's Leo speaking at the Vatican diplomats and others at the interreligious dialogue event in the Vatican, saying European institutions need people who know how to live a healthy secularism. Healthy secularism. This is essentially word for word what Francis said during his reign. So we know what's going on. Okay, so we anyone who's telling you we need more time or wait and see, this is a political tactic. It's on purpose. It's to show Leo the rad trads, that we're not really radical, we're not ideologues. It's a complete lie. It's a gaslighting tactic to tell you that things actually aren't so bad. When in fact there's news coming out every day that we know really who this guy is. So, in any case, let's get to the article at hand, the two statements by Archbishop Viganò. The first is obedient to the obedient. Obedience to the obedient. And really, this is an article that His Excellency writes in response to a professor in Italy, Professor Tribuco. That's probably not how you say it, but I apologize. And there's the argument that's made that, well, even if there is an unjust command given, and the essay in question here brings up, Archbishop Viganò brings up John Bosco, and Padre Pio. And Viganò makes the case that, yeah, it is true that authorities over various saints and other religious communities in the church's past have acted in ways that test the humility and perseverance of those who are below them, right? And we've all probably had this in our own lives with a boss who's maybe short-tempered or quick-witted and is very sharp with the tongue, right? That's not what Archbishop Viganò is addressing here. He's actually saying that's good when those situations happen, when the authority is actually Catholic and traditional and is rooted in the faith, because hierarchy in the church, again, does come down from the top. This is what obedience is due to. It's due out of justice, he says. The foundation, Archbishop Viganò says, of obedience is in the fact that the authority of the superior comes from God himself. That's true. And so to undermine that, to resist that legitimately or illegitimately, is to undermine that. But what Archbishop Viganò is saying here is that we have to recall that the obedience required by Padre Pio by an authoritarian superior was the disciplinary matter, while that expected of, he names a priest here, by a doctrinally deviant superior is obedience on a doctrinal level. And that's all the difference in the world. Because he goes on to say this: a superior who is disobedient to Christ, their authority is usurpacious, he says. Whose authority they usurp breaks the coherence of the hierarchical chain because it forces subjects to disobey them so as not to offend God. Okay. And he goes on here and he says, we cannot forget that the decision to resist false shepherds is much more painful and problematic for a priest than for a layman, even if only because a priest is financially dependent on his superior. So that makes sense, right? What we're talking about here is when the authorities in the church themselves have removed themselves from the umbrella of Christ, from the traditional faith, they break the order of hierarchy, the natural authority in the church. And so it becomes incumbent upon those subordinates to reject them. And here is where he says the key line is this: the Conciliar-Synodal hierarchy has deliberately violated the coherence of the Roman Catholic Church's 2,000-year-old tradition of obedience. It withdrew from the authority of God and the Church when, adulterating the faith, it synodalized it, that is, democratized it, claiming to place the sovereignty wrested from Christ within the people of God. And I want to stop there and bring this up because I'm not sure if you've seen this or not. The Synod on Synodality, which is continuing on in the Vatican, has put out this brand new workshop. And actually not just workshop, but dozens of workshops and seminars for upcoming participants at its meeting. And you can click on here and you can see all the different sorts of workshops and discussion and dialogue and everything that's going to take place. And this is an inversion of the traditional doctrine and understanding of the hierarchy of the church. It is therefore, Archbishop Viganò says, the hierarchy that is disobedient to Christ. And this is what's going on, and this is what's being applied actually to tradition. You're having synodality applied to the Latin Mass. And the trads are falling for it because they think they're so desperate for the Latin Mass. Again, the Latin Mass divorced from the actual doctrine it represents doesn't mean a lot. I mean, it's just like when, as Father Maudsley said, the Novus Ordo Mass and the Latin Mass is like the offering of Cain and Abel that was made to God. Abel's sacrifice, you could say the Latin Mass, was acceptable, whereas Cain's, the Novus Ordo, was not. And so you could say that's exactly what's happened here and why there's no fruits in the Novus Ordo Mass itself. So that's what's going on with that. His Excellency goes on and says, the holy disobedience of its subjects does not undermine the order willed by God, but courageously restores it. Exposing traitors and usurpers for what they are. We've used that term here, so His Excellency is spot on there. Furthermore, faced with a subversive plan by the hierarchy that has been the primary cause of the crisis in the Church for over 60 years, prudence and legitimate suspicion of bad faith with regard to superiors who continue to promote Vatican II are not only praiseworthy, but dutiful. He's saying here it's a duty to view these conciliarists, these persons in these institutions, without skepticism, with a healthy, keep them at arm's length, to not deal with them. And more importantly, he says the faithful and clergy who pretend to be dealing with normal bishops, when it is clear these bishops are actually fifth columns of the enemy, bear culpability for the cooperation in the evil they commit. Very strong, actually super strong. In fact, it undermines, again, the entire argument that we should be working with those who are in this conciliar institution and seeking approval from them, because we know their allegiances lie elsewhere, just like in the French Revolution, right? Those who swore the oath to the Masonic Republic, those clergy who said, I will take my vow, they are those who are in this conciliar church. The same thing. It's applied exactly to them. So, His Excellency goes on. Faced with the evidence that the superiors of the Conciliar-Synodal Church desire to destroy the Catholic faith, the papacy, the Mass, and the priesthood, how can these priests and others judge the behavior of those who, in order to avoid illegitimate retaliation, remain silent in the face of the spread of heresy and immorality? It's a great question. His Excellency goes on. What is being questioned here is not the authority of a legitimate bishop with his gruff manners or questionable decisions. What is being questioned is obedience to a usurped authority, which has been seized by heretical and corrupt subversives in order to effectively demolish a church from within. He goes on, obeying these pastors means becoming their accomplices, and being in communion with them excludes one from being in communion with the Roman Catholic Apostolic Church, for they themselves claim to be the new church distinguished from the pre-conciliar one. So, this throws a lot of cold water on a lot of, the claims that are out there that we just need to seek regularization. We need to put forth the Latin Mass in these places as best as possible. Again, today is St. Michael's feast, and they had a Latin Mass in the Vatican. Well, what do you think God views that as? Do you think that He views that as pleasing in this conciliar pantheon, and accepts that offering as He did Abel's, or does He view it maybe more as Cain's offering, one which is deficient, one which is detached from the actual faith that it represents? Because again, the doctrines of the traditional faith, which the Vatican II Mass rejected, the Novus Ordo Mass rejects, but which the traditional Latin Mass upholds, flies in the face of this entire conciliar pantheon, this zoo. And so, Leo is promoting that. He's promoting all of these things. He said, I want to avoid polarization. I want everybody to get along. But eventually he's going to have to do something. And we're seeing more and more of what he's doing. More importantly, in this final part of this first statement here, is something that Archbishop Viganò touches on at the very end. And we'll get into the second statement just a second after that. And it's something that I think is often forgot on trads today. And I know a lot of people mean well, and they think this crisis is really just simple. It's just like, a lot of bad clergy who had the wrong ideas, and they're not malicious, and it's simple as that. But Archbishop Viganò makes the important point where he says, look, sacred scripture speaks of false shepherds, false teachers, and false prophets. It uses this expression deliberately to highlight the deception of those who present themselves as something they are not. He mentions in the second epistle of St. Peter where it says, false teachers will arise among you. He says this more importantly. If then we have been warned that false Christs and false prophets will arise, how can we argue that they should be obeyed? Great question. When sacred scripture again warns us about them, calling them impostors and liars. If obeying these false teachers were always a duty and without consequence, why would we have not been warned? Why have we been warned by the evangelists, by St. Paul, by St. Peter, and St. Jude, Thaddeus, not to listen to them? And he says more importantly here at the end, and this is what I've been saying for a while now. Again, we are not in the business of condemning persons per se. I'm not out here enjoying having to report on the heretical things Leo and he's doing every day, the modernist things that he's saying and doing. Again, at modernism, ecumenism, liberalism, religious indifferentism, immigrationism. He's promoting sustainability, ecological, the green movement. We're dealing with principles. We're dealing with doctrines. We're dealing with positions, okay? Not people. And when we do that, we're defending errors. Again, it was Blessed Pius IX who issued a syllabus of errors, right? He denounced every single thing, left, right, and center. And what was he called for it? He was called a curmudgeon. He was called someone who had bitter zeal. He was called someone who was backwards, insular, was not realistic, not very prudent, wasn't reading the signs of the times. So it's sort of interesting to hear a lot of these trads use these same arguments now against us and others when, we're just doing what Blessed Pius IX did in condemning the errors, right? Again, we were called trad-doomers very early on in this pontificate, right? By trads themselves, so-called people who you think would have gotten it by now. That's the John the 23rd argument that he used against Lefebvre and others, Cardinal Taviani, and others who said we should just repeat the condemnations of St. Pius X, Vatican I, Council of Trent, Blessed Pius IX. So, take a hard look in the mirror, guys, and see that you're repeating the same position, same thinking, thought approach as the liberals who criticized Blessed Pius IX and John the 23rd when he was criticizing the real trads back at Vatican II. But back to Archbishop Viganò's statement here. He says, precisely because the church does not belong to us but to Christ. Again, we defend the honor of Christ when we denounce these things. We have to do that. We are required to prevent our enemies from acting undisturbed and unpunished, jeopardizing the eternal salvation of so many souls. And this is what the Lord expects of us. Not a comfortable quietism disguised as humility or fatalism. I think you can clearly read between the lines there, and that is His Excellency's way of saying, we're not going to zip it. We have a duty here before God to speak up. And the writing is clear. It's right there for everyone to see. And, how long is it going to keep lasting? How long is this lie going to be maintained? This false pretense of just waiting and seeing and waiting and seeing and waiting and seeing? Is it 6 more months? Is it a year? 5 years? I mean, come back to reality, guys. God will reward your truth-telling far more than you think he's going to reward your strategic manipulation and deception and quietism and strategizing. Now, I'm all for putting the best foot forward. Absolutely. We have to do that. And I think we've been doing that here. And so has others like Chris Jackson, Kelly Esquire, Mario Dirksen, Bishop Sanborn, tons of others, many, many others who have not mentioned there. And they will continue to put their best foot forward, because when you do that, we're putting our best foot forward for God. That's what we're doing. So the second statement here that His Excellency makes, called non sequitur, is a further response to Professor Trabucco's remarks. And it's a bit shorter, but it's more to the point and really drives home what we're talking about here. And it shows exactly why he has this down right, and why Burke, Supich, sorry, not Supich, of course not Supich, Burke, Sarah, Schneider have it wrong. And here's what His Excellency says. The unity achieved through obedience is the effect, not the cause, of the profession of the same faith. The faithful are united in the church under the authority of the Roman Pontiff because they believe the same doctrine, not the other way around. The refusal to obey an ecclesiastical authority when that authority commands something that contradicts the faith cannot constitute an attack on unity, because it is the illegitimate order of a superior that is schismatic and scandalous in nature, not the disobedience of the subject who remains faithful to God. And here's where I think His Excellency's point is drawn out even all the more. Ecclesial communion cannot be defended at the cost of tearing apart the truth of the faith, because it is obedience that is ordered to the faith, and not vice versa. He goes on, it is the duty of every baptized person to defend and proclaim sound doctrine and to denounce anybody in authority who abuses it, causing grave scandal to the common people. So again, he's saying we're not going to go quiet. We're not going to do that. That's not our job. That's not what we're here to do. We are here as Catholics to defend the honor of God, and that's what we'll do. And he notes, though, however, as we here have been getting the attacks as well. Again, we are obviously having an audience, having an effect with your help. Again, thanks for tuning in today here for the program. Follow us on Twitter. Go to our Substack, like our YouTube channel, and follow us there. Subscribe to us there, as well as on Rumble, because this is how the show grows. This is how the message grows. This is how the counter-revolutionary movement grows. As Archbishop Viganò says here, just as it is a scandal that heretics, schismatics, corrupt individuals, and notorious fornicators are not prosecuted, but rather encouraged, anyone who denounces this crisis, identifies its causes, as we have, and identifies those who are responsible, as we have, those will be declared schismatic. They will be declared schismatic and excommunicated. And that, again, my friends, is where the graces are being won right now. I hear a lot of talk about a lot of these conservative clergy being St. John of the Cross, or rather St. John the Apostle, who was at the foot of the cross. And don't leave the church, right? No, which church are we talking about? The one draped in velvet, where we have LGBT pilgrimages, and we have a modernist on the throne? I mean, we're just going to resist until there's no church left? Or are we going to actually speak the truth and rebuild? Because Lefebvre knew excommunication from the conciliar authorities means nothing. It means nothing. These people are usurpers. They're illegitimate. It's the French Revolution in the church. Consider Robespierre excommunicating, trying to attack the Catholics in the Vendée, right? The attacks that these enemies of Christ launched against the actual Catholics. Do you think anything they said against them mattered? They're illegitimate, right? So this is how we view these so-called excommunications. Viganò, excommunicated? What a mark of honor it is to be considered outside this church, as Archbishop Viganò said. or as Archbishop Lefebvre said as well, right? That was his quote originally. So this is our fight. This is our battle. And the unity that is so-called claimed by being one with this conciliar church is a fiction. It means nothing. This church does not have the marks of the church, the real church. And here's what Archbishop Viganò says about that. The unity they claim is a simulacrum, a fiction, a grotesque imposture, hiding the indifferentism of the synodal pantheon, which includes both the conservatives of Summorum Pontificum, as well as the LGBT progressives of James Martin, both of Our Lady of Fatima, as well as the Pachamama, as well as the Mass of the Ages, alongside the Novus Ordo. The only inalienable dogma is that everyone must recognize the Second Vatican Council, its ecclesiology, its morality, its liturgy, its saints, its martyrs, and above all, its excommunicated people and its heretics. That is the radical traditionalists who refuse to be tamed by the new synodal demands. As for the rest of us, he goes on, Leo has explicitly said that one can safely gloss over it in the name of ecumenism and synodal unity, including the filioque of the creed. And he says Vatican II was the founding of a church born in 1962, which claims the authority of the true church, from whose magisterium, however, it distances itself and opposes it. Very, very strong statement by His Excellency. Only a couple more quotes here to read to you all. Thanks again for tuning in. Here's what he goes on to say. We therefore find ourselves before an authority, the supreme authority that's clearly disobedient to Christ, the head of the mystical body, by which usurping Christ's authority claims to decide in what respects those subjects to it must obey, disobeying God's commands. Can we imagine recognizing this authority as legitimate and owing it obedience, lest we tear apart the unity that the hierarchy has already shattered with its own disobedience to God? How could we possibly ratify its abuses, making ourselves accomplices in those who are betraying the truth? Accomplices in betraying the truth. Do you want to be that? I ask you, those who are in this trad movement. Do you want to be a collaborator with the destruction of the faith? Or do you want to follow in the path of the martyrs, those who are really walking the faith, who are willing to risk so-called excommunication, those who really deserve the cardinal's colors? Archbishop Viganò, Archbishop Lefebvre, all the other heroic saints who will one day hopefully be declared saints, those clergy who are in those front lines, in those small pockets of resistance, doing their best they can, being those Abels who are pleasing to God, offering their sacrifice amid this persecution, being ostracized from the conciliar authorities, not willing to care what these conciliar modernists and usurpers have to say, because they know what they're doing is obeying God. That's where the real front lines in this battle are taking place. That's how this crisis is going to end, by more souls supporting those, and by those clergy and nuns and religious, not these making deals and strategies and trying to have big numbers. It was, again, Father Salvani, the Spanish priest in the 1890s, who said liberalism is a sin, and liberal Catholics love to build up the big numbers they have. But actually, what pleases God most, the strongest reaction to the liberal ideology, the anti-liberal ideology that we need, is intensity, not the numbers, not the quantity, but the quality. And that's what we need right now. Strong numbers, strong resistance, strong in faith, to not be concerned about what comes our way, but rather to obey God, not to offer him something that is displeasing, as the Novus Ordo Mass is, as it seems now also that what will be maybe even given to the Trad Inc. movement, this Leo-approved Latin Mass concession that he might get from them, that they might get from him in exchange for their silence. Very, very shameful if that ever goes through. We hope that these leaders will speak the truth, and that they will be rewarded for doing so. Anyway, everybody, thanks for tuning in today. This again, Stephen Cox for Cox News. May God bless you. May God bless Archbishop Viganò. Pray for me, pray for him, pray for the church. Thanks, and God bless.